Admiral Kivek stood at his command post, his massive 12-foot frame casting a long shadow across the Confederation's holographic display. His secondary eyes blinked in amusement as he studied the sensor readings of the approaching vessels. "Such tiny things," he rumbled, mandibles clicking with barely contained laughter. "Barely larger than our scout ships." The command center of Station Alpha 7 buzzed with activity as various alien species worked at their stations. Most of them were at least twice the size of the average human, though none quite matched the impressive height of the Vexthori Admiral. Lieutenant Zaruk, a green-scaled reptiloid, approached with a data tablet. "Admiral, we've completed initial scans of the unknown fleet. 27 vessels in total, the largest being only 300 meters in length." She paused, checking her readings again. "They appear to be using fusion drives, sir." This drew genuine laughter from Kivek and several nearby officers. Fusion drives were considered primitive technology, something most spacefaring races abandoned centuries ago in favor of quantum propulsion systems. "Have they responded to our identification requests?" Kivek asked, still chuckling. "Yes, sir. They identify themselves as humans from a planet called Earth. They claim to be seeking diplomatic contact and trade relations." The Admiral's laughter died down as he studied the approaching fleet more carefully. Something seemed odd about their formation. Despite their small size, the ships moved with precise coordination that spoke of either exceptional skill or advanced automation. "Show me their exact position relative to our defense grid," he ordered. The holographic display zoomed out, showing the human fleet's approach vector. Kivek noticed they had positioned themselves just outside the effective range of the station's primary weapon systems. Coincidence, perhaps, but his military training made him suspicious of coincidences. "Send them our standard warning message," he commanded. "Make sure to include visual of our defensive capabilities. Let's see how these humans react to seeing real warships." The communication officer, a tentacled myriad, transmitted the message. The holographic display showed the Confederation's impressive fleet, massive dreadnoughts stretching 3 kilometers in length, accompanied by support vessels that dwarfed the largest human ship. The response came quickly, too quickly, Kivek thought. The translation matrix shouldn't have been able to process an unknown language that fast. A human face appeared on the main screen. Female, by their species standards, with features that marked her as being from Earth's eastern regions. "This is Ambassador Sarah Chen of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. We appreciate your welcome and acknowledge your impressive defensive capabilities." The human's perfect translation and calm demeanor caused Kivek to narrow his primary eyes. There was no sign of intimidation in her voice, despite the overwhelming display of Confederation power. "We request permission to approach and begin diplomatic discussions," Ambassador Chen continued. "We believe there is much we could learn from each other." Kivek studied the human's expression. Either their species was remarkably good at hiding fear, or they genuinely weren't impressed by the Confederation's show of force. Neither option made him comfortable. "Permission granted," he replied, trying to maintain his air of superiority. "Though I suggest you maintain your distance from our warships. We wouldn't want any accidents with your fusion drives." Ambassador Chen smiled, a gesture Kivek's cultural database identified as potentially meaning anything from friendship to hidden threat. "Thank you, Admiral. We'll maintain a safe distance." Chen out. As the transmission ended, Kivek turned to his senior staff. "Monitor every move those ships make. Something about this doesn't feel right." "Sir," Lieutenant Zaruk interjected, "surely you don't consider these primitives a threat?" The Admiral watched the small fleet's perfectly synchronized movement on the display. "In my experience, Lieutenant, it's the small ones you need to watch most carefully." Ambassador Chen sat in her command chair aboard the Earth vessel Diplomatic Heart, reviewing the scans her ship had quietly taken during the initial contact. The Confederation's arrogance had worked in humanity's favor. They hadn't even noticed the advanced sensor suites happening right under their noses. "What do you think, ARIA?" Sarah asked the ship's eye. A soft blue hologram appeared beside her chair. Their technology is impressive in scale, but inefficient in design. They rely too heavily on brute force approaches. The AI paused, analyzing more data. Their ships are also broadcasting far more information than they realize. Sarah smiled. The Confederation's massive ships were practically shouting their specifications into space. Their belief in their own superiority had made them careless. Meanwhile, aboard Station Alpha 7, Admiral X was growing frustrated. His best technicians had spent hours trying to scan the human vessels, but their readings made no sense. The ships appeared to be using primitive technology, yet their energy signatures kept shifting and changing. "Sir," Lieutenant Zaruk reported, "Ambassador Chen requests a face-to-face meeting." Kvex clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "Very well. Have her shuttle dock in Bay 12. Make sure our security teams are ready." When Sarah's shuttle arrived, the Confederation officials were surprised by its small size. It seemed barely large enough for two humans. As the airlock cycled, Kvex and his team waited, expecting a struggling diplomatic party adjusting to their artificial gravity. Instead, Ambassador Chen walked out alone, moving as comfortably as if she were on Earth. She smiled up at the towering aliens, showing no sign of intimidation. "Thank you for hosting me, Admiral Kvex," she said, bowing slightly. "I hope we can discuss trade opportunities that would benefit both our peoples." Kvex led her to the station's conference room, designed for beings twice her size. Sarah took her seat at the massive table without comment, though she noticed the Confederation officials struggling to hide their amusement at her relatively tiny size. "Tell me, Ambassador," Kvex began, his tone condescending, "what could your developing civilization possibly offer the Confederation?" Sarah pulled out a small device and placed it on the table. A hologram appeared, showing complex molecular structures. "For starters, we've perfected molecular manufacturing. We can create materials atom by atom, allowing us to build smaller but more efficient ships." The Confederation scientists in the room stopped their quiet laughter. One of them, a tall myriad, leaned forward with sudden interest. "Impossible," the scientist said. "The energy requirements alone would be manageable." Sarah interrupted, "If you understand quantum mechanics properly." She turned to Kvex. "Admiral, we've observed your ships rely heavily on size and power. Our approach is different." Before Kvex could respond, an alarm blared through the station. Lieutenant Zaruk rushed into the room, her scales pale with concern. "Admiral, 3 pirate vessels just dropped out of hyperspace near the human fleet." Sarah tapped her wrist device calmly. "Area, activate Defense Protocol 4. Non-lethal response only." Kvex watched in disbelief as the human ambassador remained perfectly calm while pirates approached her supposedly vulnerable fleet. Either she was insane, or— "Ambassador," he said carefully, "perhaps we should dispatch our patrol ships to assist." Sarah held up her hand, still smiling. "That won't be necessary, Admiral. In fact, I suggest you watch carefully. You're about to learn why size isn't everything in space warfare." The room fell silent as everyone turned to the main display, waiting to see how the tiny human ships would handle their first real challenge in Confederation space. Captain Draz of the pirate vessel Bloodfang couldn't believe his luck. His scanner showed a group of tiny, primitive ships, easy targets with probably valuable cargo. With his 3 heavily armed vessels, this would be the easiest raid of his career. "Look at those pathetic fusion drives," he sneered to his crew. "They're probably carrying valuable trade goods to impress the Confederation. Fire warning shots across their bow." The pirate ships launched bright purple energy beams toward the human fleet. But something strange happened. The beams passed right through the ships as if they weren't there. "What trickery is this?" Draz growled, hitting his sensor display in frustration. "All ships, full attack pattern. Use maximum power." Back on Station Alpha 7, Admiral Kvex and his staff watched in amazement. The human ships hadn't even tried to dodge the attacks. Instead, the energy weapons simply passed through them without effect. Ambassador Chen sat calmly, sipping a drink. "Quantum ghost technology," she explained. "Our ships can partially exist in multiple dimensions at once. Very useful for avoiding unwanted attention." Before Kivex could respond, the human fleet began to move. Their formation shifted with impossible speed and precision, no signs of engine flares visible. "Araya." Sarah spoke into her wrist device. "You may proceed with the demonstration." The human ships suddenly split apart, each vessel breaking into 3 smaller units. The pirates now faced not 27 targets, but 81. The smaller units zipped between the pirate vessels with speed that seemed to ignore normal physics. "Impossible," Lieutenant Zaruk exclaimed. "Their acceleration should be crushing their crews." Sarah smiled. "Who said our ships have crews? Most of our fleet is automated, controlled by AI systems like ARI. Humans only crew the command vessels." On the main display, the battle, if it could be called that, continued. The human ships danced around the pirate vessels, which fired wildly and hit nothing. Then, small points of light emerged from the human ships. "Just watch," Sarah said, noting Kivex's concerned expression. "We're not going to destroy them." The points of light surrounded each pirate ship. Suddenly, all power on the pirate vessels went dark. Their weapons, engines, and even life support shut down, leaving them floating helplessly in space. "Nanite swarms," Sarah explained. "They temporarily disabled their systems. Don't worry. Life support will restart in 30 seconds, but weapons and engines will remain offline." Captain Draz and his crew panicked as their ships went dark. When power returned, they found themselves unable to move or fight, their weapons completely unresponsive. A message played through their communication systems. "This is ARIA of the Earth Fleet. Your ships have been temporarily disabled. Confederation authorities will arrive shortly to take you into custody. Remember this lesson. Size and power mean nothing without the intelligence to use them properly." Admiral Kivex turned to Sarah, his earlier arrogance replaced with cautious respect. "You could have destroyed them easily." "We could have," Sarah agreed, "but that wasn't necessary. Sometimes the best way to show strength is to choose not to use it." She stood up, straightening her uniform. "Now shall we discuss those trade agreements? I believe we have some technologies that might interest you." The Confederation officers watched the small human ships regrouping into their original formation, their earlier mockery forgotten. These weren't primitive vessels piloted by an emerging species. They were watching the products of a civilization that had taken a completely different path to the stars. As cleanup crews moved to collect the disabled pirate ships, Kivex realized that the humans' greatest weapon wasn't their technology. It was letting others underestimate them. The Confederation's top scientists gathered in Station Alpha 7's main research lab, reviewing footage of the battle with the pirates. Dr. Xelena, the station's chief researcher, had not slept since the incident. Her 6-fingered hands moved quickly over the holographic controls as she studied every detail. "It doesn't make sense," she muttered, her antennae twitching in frustration. "Their shifts show fusion drive signatures, but the energy readings are all wrong." Admiral Kivex stood behind her, watching the recordings of human ships splitting apart and reforming. The motion was so smooth, it almost looked like liquid metal flowing through space. "What have you learned?" he asked. Dr. Xelena pulled up multiple diagrams. "Sir, we've been deceived. Those aren't fusion drives at all. The energy signature is just a cover." She zoomed in on one of the smaller human ships. "Look at these readings. They're using zero-point energy, drawing power from empty space itself." The room fell silent. Zero-point energy was theoretical, something the Confederation had tried and failed to harness for centuries. Lieutenant Zaruk entered the lab, carrying new reports. "Sir, it gets worse. We've analyzed their communication patterns during the battle. Those ships, They're not just automated. They're running true AI systems. Kvex's primary eyes widened. Impossible. True AI is too dangerous. Every species that's tried it has faced disaster. Not the humans, Zarek replied. Their AI named ARIA made decisions faster than any organic commander could. The entire battle was over in less than 2 minutes. In another part of the station, Ambassador Chen sat in a meeting with the Confederation's Trade Council. She could tell from their body language that they had finally started taking humans seriously. Your ships, one council member asked, how many are actually crewed by humans? Sarah smiled. In our current fleet, only 3 vessels have human crews. The rest are autonomous units controlled by AI systems like ARIA. But the risks, another council member started, were solved centuries ago. Sarah interrupted. We learned to develop AI systems that share human values. They're not our servants. They're our partners. Back in the lab, Dr. Xelna made another discovery that made her scales pale. Admiral, look at this analysis of their ship materials. The molecular structure, it's perfectly arranged. Every single atom is exactly where it needs to be. What does that mean? Kvex asked, though he feared he knew the answer. It means they can control matter at the atomic level. Their ships aren't built, they're grown. They can probably repair themselves, adapt to damage, maybe even evolve during battle. Kvex walked to the window, watching the small human fleet floating peacefully in space. He had thought them primitive because of their size, but now he understood. They weren't primitive, they were precise. Every part of their technology was perfectly engineered down to the smallest detail. Lieutenant Zarek approached with one final report. Sir, we've detected something else. The human fleet, it's broadcasting the signal into deep space. Very weak, easy to miss. Can you decode it? Yes, sir. It's a status report to other human fleets. Sir, Zarek's voice trembled slightly. According to this, they have similar fleets stationed near 50 different star systems. This isn't their main force. It's just a diplomatic mission. Admiral Kvex stared at the human ships, finally understanding the truth. The Confederation had built bigger ships, more powerful weapons, larger stations. But the humans, they had built smarter. While the Confederation focused on size and power, humanity had quietly mastered the fundamental forces of the universe itself. Contact Ambassador Chen, he ordered. Tell her the Confederation is very interested in discussing those trade agreements. The emergency alarms on Station Alpha 7 blared without warning. Admiral Kvex rushed to the command center, where chaos had erupted. The massive view screen showed hundreds of unknown vessels dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of Confederation space. Report, he barked. Lieutenant Zarek's scales had turned pale. Sir, it's the Kralthak. They've launched a full invasion fleet. 3 of our outer colonies are already under attack. The Kralthak were the stuff of nightmares, a warrior species that lived for conquest. Their ships were even larger than the Confederation's, dark vessels that looked like massive floating fortresses. Ambassador Chen stood quietly in the corner of the command center, watching the situation unfold. She had been in a trade meeting when the alarm started. How many ships? Kvex demanded. Over 500 vessels, sir. Our colony defenses are failing. The Kralthak ships, they're using some kind of new weapon that cuts right through our shields. Kvex slammed his fist on the control panel. Launch everything we have. All ships to battle stations. The Confederation's mighty fleet moved into action. Huge dreadnoughts and battlecruisers powered up their engines, but they were so large that it would take hours to reach the colonies under attack. Sarah Chen stepped forward. Admiral, we can help. Kvex turned to her, his mandibles clicking in frustration. With all due respect, Ambassador, this isn't a handful of pirates. The Kralthak are the most feared warriors in 3 galaxies, and your ships are too slow to save those colonies, Sarah said calmly. She touched her wrist device. Area, contact all Earth fleets in range. Initiate Protocol Defender. The AI's voice echoed through the command center. Message sent, Ambassador. 5 human fleets are responding. Estimated arrival time, 15 minutes. Kvex's eyes widened. 15 minutes. That's impossible. The nearest systems are hours away at maximum speed. Sarah smiled. Remember those fusion drives you mocked? They're not our only means of transportation. Adoraya, show them. The station's sensors lit up as space itself seemed to ripple. Small groups of human ships began appearing near each threatened colony, emerging from what looked like tears in reality. Quantum tunneling. Sarah explained. We don't need to travel through space. We can simply step through it. On the main screen, they watched as the human vessels, tiny compared to both Confederation and Kralfak ships, moved into defensive positions around the colonies. They'll be slaughtered, Lieutenant Zaruk whispered. The first Kralfak ship fired its new weapon at a human vessel. But instead of cutting through it, the beam scattered into harmless light. The human ships had already adapted to the threat. Araya. Sarah commanded, you have permission to engage. Defensive protocols only. Protect those colonies. The human ships suddenly began moving in ways that seemed to defy physics, their AI systems coordinating with perfect precision. They danced between the massive Kralfak vessels, their smaller size now proving to be an advantage rather than a weakness. Admiral Kvex watched in amazement as the supposedly primitive human fleet began to turn the tide of battle. Their ships moved like a single organism, adapting and evolving their tactics in real time. Sarah turned to Kvex. Admiral, your reinforcements will arrive in a few hours. We'll hold them until then. She paused, then added softly, sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest advantage of all. Kvex nodded slowly, finally understanding. The humans hadn't revealed their true capabilities until now because they hadn't needed to. They had waited until it really mattered, until lives needed to be saved. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since the alarms began, hope returned to Station Alpha 7's command center. The Kralfak commander, General Vorkath, stood on his bridge, his gray-scaled skin darkening with rage. His massive flagship, 20 times larger than the largest human vessel, had yet to land a single hit on the irritating human ships. How are they predicting our attacks? He roared. No species has ever countered our quantum strike weapons. On the main battlefield near Colony 7, human ships moved in perfect formation. Their movements weren't just coordinated. They were anticipating attacks before they happened. Inside the diplomatic heart, Ambassador Chen watched multiple holographic displays as Araya processed combat data in real time. Araya, explain the battle strategy for our Confederation allies, Sarah requested, knowing the Station Alpha 7 command center was listening. The AI's calm voice filled both ships. The Kralfak use a predictable quantum encryption for their combat communications. It took me 3.2 seconds to crack their codes. We are now reading their orders before their own ships receive them. Admiral Kvex watched in amazement as the human ships demonstrated maneuvers he'd never seen before. Some of the smaller vessels suddenly began joining together, combining into larger units that still maintained incredible speed. What are they doing? Lieutenant Zaruk asked, staring at the display. Sarah smiled. Showing you why we build small. Araya. Initiate Prometheus Protocol. The human fleet's formation shifted. 20 small ships combined into what looked like a lattice of energy and metal, forming a structure that matched the size of a Kralfak battleship. But unlike the bulky enemy vessels, this combined form moved with the grace of its smaller components. Impossible. General Vorkath shouted as he watched the transformation. All ships, focus fire on that combined human vessel. The Kralfak fleet launched a massive barrage of quantum strike weapons, but the human ships had already analyzed and adapted to the technology. The combined vessel's surface rippled like water, each attack passing harmlessly through quantum ghost fields. Now, Sarah commanded, show them what real quantum technology can do. The combined human ship pulsed with energy, Suddenly, the space around 3 Kralthak vessels distorted. The massive enemy ships found themselves trapped in a quantum bubble where time moved at 1,000th of normal speed. "What sorcery is this?" Vorkath demanded. "Not sorcery." Aria's voice suddenly came through on all Kralthak frequencies. "Simply better understanding of quantum mechanics. Your ships are now trapped in a localized time dilation field. From your perspective, the battle will be over in seconds. From theirs, it will take days." The remaining human ships continued their dance through space, their smaller size allowing them to target weak points in the Kralthak fleet's formation. They didn't need to destroy the enemy ships. They simply trapped them in quantum bubbles, effectively removing them from the battle. On Station Alpha 7, Admiral Kvex turned to Sarah. "Your ships could have done this from the beginning. Why wait?" "2 reasons," Sarah replied. "First, we needed to analyze their technology up close. Second," she paused, watching another group of human ships combine into a new configuration. "We believe that the Confederation needed to see this, to understand that true strength isn't about size or power, it's about adaptation and intelligence." The battle turned into a display of technological superiority. The human ships, whether separate or combined, moved through space like liquid mercury, flowing around enemy attacks while systematically neutralizing the invasion fleet. General Vorkath watched in horror as his mighty armada was reduced to helpless observers, trapped in quantum bubbles or disabled by targeted strikes from ships they had initially dismissed as insignificant. The feared Kralthak invasion, expected to be a devastating show of force, had instead become a lesson in humility, taught by the very ships they had mocked for being too small. 1 week after the battle, Station Alpha 7's main conference room looked very different. The Confederation's leaders, who once towered over Ambassador Chen with arrogant amusement, now sat attentively as she spoke. The captured Kralthak General Vorkath sat in chains nearby, his pride shattered like his fleet. "All Kralthak ships have been released from the time dilation fields," Sarah reported. "As promised, none were destroyed, though I imagine experiencing a week of battle in what felt like a few seconds was disorienting." Vorkath growled softly. "Why did you spare us? Your ships could have destroyed our fleet." "Because," Sarah explained, "humans learned long ago that the strongest warrior isn't the one who can destroy the most, but the one who can win without destroying anything." Admiral Kvex stepped forward, his massive frame no longer intimidating to the humans present. "The Confederation owes humanity a debt. But I must ask, why build such small ships when you clearly have the technology to build larger ones?" Sarah gestured, and Aria created a hologram showing the evolution of human spacecraft. "We started with big ships, like everyone else, but we discovered something interesting. The smaller the ship, the more efficient our quantum systems became. So we went smaller, not larger." Lieutenant Zarok, reviewing battle data on her tablet, looked up. "According to these readings, your fleet has already established bases in over 500 star systems. How did we not notice?" "Because you weren't looking," Sarah smiled. "Everyone expects advanced civilizations to build bigger, more obvious things. We built smaller, smarter, and more efficient. Your scans were looking for massive energy signatures, not the tiny quantum ripples our ships create." The station's chief scientist, Dr. Xelena, rushed into the room with new findings. "Ambassador, we've analyzed your ship's adaptive capabilities. The molecular restructuring, the quantum ghost fields, the AI integration. It's centuries ahead of anything we imagined possible." "Not ahead," Sarah corrected gently. "Just different. While the Confederation focused on building bigger ships with more powerful weapons, we focused on understanding the fundamental laws of physics. Size became irrelevant once we mastered quantum engineering." Admiral Kvex stood, addressing the gathered officials. "The Confederation hereby formally apologizes for our dismissal of human technology and capability. We request." He paused, his mandibles clicking in what humans now recognized as embarrassment. "We request human military advisors to help modernize our fleet." Sarah nodded. "We would be happy to help. But remember, the goal isn't to make your ships more powerful. It's to make them smarter." Vorkath, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. "For centuries, the Kralthak believed that bigger ships meant greater strength. You proved us wrong without destroying a single vessel. What will happen to us now?" "That's up to the Confederation," Sarah replied. "Though humanity would be willing to share some of our technology with the Kralthak too, if you're interested in learning a new way of thinking about space travel." The room fell silent as everyone processed this offer. The humans weren't just sharing technology. They were sharing a completely different philosophy about power and progress. Admiral Kvex turned to Sarah. "When your tiny fleet first appeared, we thought we were meeting a primitive species seeking protection from the dangers of space. Instead, we were meeting our teachers." Sarah stood, looking out at the stars through the station's massive window. Human ships, small but gleaming, flew past in perfect formation. "The universe has many lessons to teach us, Admiral. Perhaps the most important is that true strength often comes in unexpected packages." She turned back to the room, smiling. "Now shall we begin planning for a future where size doesn't determine power and where cooperation matters more than conquest?" The gathered aliens, Confederation, Kralthak, and others, nodded in agreement. The era of massive warships was ending. The age of human innovation had begun.